So I was super lucky to ride some incredible bikes last year, and now that 2020 is well and truly behind us, I thought it was a good opportunity to reflect back on my favourites. So here are 10 that I enjoyed the most, and I'll save what I thought was the best bike of the year for last. But before we get started, if you're new here and you want to see reviews of this year's latest and greatest motorcycles, then please do remember to hit subscribe. I'll be riding as many of them as possible, so be sure to subscribe if you want to see those videos as soon as they go live. Now, of course, I didn't get to ride every single bike on the market, so this isn't a comprehensive best of 2020, just my pick of the ones that I was fortunate enough to get hold of. I've got to say the year kicked off in style with the press launch of the new Tiger 900 in Morocco, and the bike didn't disappoint. For me, its strengths were threefold. Firstly, the new T-plane crank, which gives the Tiger a torquier feel in the low revs and a rougher growl at the exhaust. And Triumph have done that to compete with the twins that this bike goes up against, so the KTM 890 Adventure, F850 GS, the Africa Twin, and the result truly is something that's a bit of a hybrid between a twin and a triple. You still get that top-end reviness that you get with 3 cylinders, but now you also get more of a grunty feel at lower revs, which is especially handy off-road. They've also made a whole bunch of changes to the chassis. There's a narrower midsection for maneuverability, and there's a split radiator and smaller sump, and that's allowed them to move the engine forward and down whilst maintaining the front wheel travel and ground clearance. I mean, I'm not the most experienced rider off-road, but to me, it felt super nimble, dead stable and reassuring, and at the same time, still capable of a few thrills on the road as well. The last thing I loved about this bike though was the standard spec equipment, especially of the Rally Pro at this price point versus the competition is exceptional. You've got a 7-inch TFT screen, heated grips, heated seat front and rear with separate controls, a quick shifter, peripheral lights, handguards, a sump guard, engine bars, a stash under the seat for your phone with a charging point, a center stand, Bluetooth connectivity, 6 riding modes and tire pressure monitoring. When you compare that to other adventure bikes, it's a heck of a lot of features for just over 13 grand. I've got a press bike of the Rally Pro coming in a couple of months time, so I'll look forward to putting in some more miles on it and getting into some real detail on some of these features. Now, of course, you know me, there's a couple of other Triumphs in this list, so I'll get them out of the way first. It feels like a really long time since I rode the Rocket 3, but it was, in fact, in January 2020, and although I only had it for a couple of hours, it certainly made a lasting impression. Obviously, there's the engine, 2.5 litres, which makes it the largest capacity production motorcycle on the market, and 221 newton meters of peak torque at 4,000 revs makes it the torquiest too. Over 200 newton meters is available right down from at 2,500 revs, so of course it has a real rip your arms out feel under heavy acceleration. But none of this really comes as a surprise. That's what the Rocket name is all about. What did surprise me was just how nimble it felt as I picked my way through the traffic in central London. They've shed 40 kilograms since the last generation with a lighter engine and a new aluminium frame responsible for a good share of that weight loss. And although it's still a 290 kilogram bike, it feels much more manageable than you'd imagine. Brakes and suspension are really nicely spec'd. The TFT dash works nicely as well. And I mean, in terms of looks, it could be a concept bike straight out of a motorcycle show. At 20 grand, I doubt I'll own one anytime soon, but one that I will is the Triumph TRIDENT. At the opposite end of the pricing spectrum and aiming to compete with other affordable middleweight nakeds like the super popular MT-07, the TRIDENT represents a new lower entry point into the Triumph range at a touch over 7 grand. It's a sprightly little thing that handles exceptionally well, especially considering that it's built to a price. So the frame is made from a tubular steel as opposed to the aluminium of the Street Triple. Suspension's non-adjustable apart from preload on the shock, and the brakes are relatively modest looking 2-pot Nissin calipers at the front, but everything is set up beautifully and it's a real treat to ride. Now, 80 horsepower isn't going to set the world alight, but for riding on the road in the UK, it's plenty enough and it delivers some satisfying torque through that mid-range. There's also some nice tech and finishing on show given the price. You've got LED lighting, self-cancelling indicators, a part LCD, part TFT dash, a couple of riding modes and plenty of accessories like phone connectivity, heated grips, quick shifter. My Mine's on order. Hopefully I'll get it in the next couple of weeks. I can't wait to make some more videos with it. In many ways, the Trident reminded me of the VITPILEN 701. Lightweight and flickable, stylish finishing, relatively affordable, and a usable amount of power for the road. I really enjoyed this one every time I rode it. It just put a massive grin on my face. I mean, one downside is I don't know if I could live with the clip-on bars in the long run. Perhaps the sat-up position of its sibling, the VITPILEN, would be better suited to everyday riding. But for a countryside blast, the VITPILEN is an absolute hoot. It does vibe a bit, being a big old single cylinder, but for me it just added to the feeling of speed and drama when you weren't actually going dangerously fast. It's not as refined as the Trident, but if your only objective is to have fun on Sunday runs down little country roads, then this one is definitely worth a look. From the lightweight naked to the super heavyweight tourer, 2020 was the year that I first got to ride a Goldwing, and it was brilliant. Forget all of the stereotypes about it being like a car, even if it does have an airbag, and just enjoy the sheer floaty luxury that the Goldwing provides. The flat 6 engine is a big factor here for me, perfectly balanced so that you barely notice it rumbling beneath you, apart from that lovely Porsche-esque exhaust note when you wind it on a bit. But for me, it's the DCT transmission that really elevates it to the next level of comfort and serenity. Essentially, it's an automatic gearbox, but it uses 2 clutches to switch between 2 sets of gears. It gives it a beautiful, seamless delivery of power as you move up and down the box, and it really has its place on a big tourer like this. Any slight abruptness in the shifts is largely negated by the fact that it's almost 400 kilograms in weight, and low speed maneuvers weren't actually that bad with the right settings and a bit of practice. The list of features is almost endless, as you'd expect for 30 grand, and it really is a premium experience in the cockpit. But I also found myself surprised by how well it can hustle, especially if you stick the DCT into sport or manual mode. I actually got quite familiar with DCT last year, having also ridden the XADV and the Africa Twin Adventure Sports. The Goldwing is where it makes complete and utter sense to me, but if you're intending to use an adventure bike as a long distance tourer, then the Africa Twin DCT works pretty nicely too. In fact, in many ways, it's a bit like a Goldwing ADV. It's got masses of wind protection from the big bodywork, plenty of range from its 24.8 litre tank, an Apple CarPlay integration with the TFT dash, LED cornering headlights, loads of riding modes, cruise control, an option for semi-active electronic suspension, a nice comfy riding position, and plenty of grunt from the new 1100cc version of Honda's Parallel Twin. It works fine for a bit of light off-roading as well, but I was lucky enough to try the manual box on the regular base spec Africa Twin, and it certainly felt the more manageable of the two in that context, just as Honda intended. But either way, I thoroughly enjoyed both of them, especially the engine with that punchy, pulsing exhaust note. At the same time as having the Africa Twin Adventure Sports in the garage, I was also borrowing the R9T from BMW and managed to take them both out for a day of riding with my buddy Tim from Rarefied Road. In fact, we actually do a podcast together, Full Tank Motorcycle Podcast. You can find it if you search in Spotify or your favorite podcast player. Now, I'd be hard pushed to pick between the two, but the R9T really surprised me with just how much I enjoyed it. Yes, it looks absolutely stunning, especially as BMW had tricked this press bike out with plenty of their Option 719 billet parts and the fancy paint job. But for me, it was the simplicity and the character that really pulled me in with this bike. There's barely any fancy electronics to speak of, and it really embodies the spirit of retro motorcycles and leaves you undistracted to focus on the fundamental mechanical satisfaction of the bike. The Boxer Twin is, of course, distinctive in its appearance and that droning exhaust note that comes from its even firing intervals. But it's also pretty lively in this stripped back chassis, and I had the front end skipping around on plenty of occasions. And then when you combine it with decent suspension, nice sharp brakes with plenty of feel, you've got everything you need for a good day's riding. Now, Tim actually joined me for another pretty memorable day out, and that was up at Crazy Horse in Bury St Edmunds with two more cracking bikes. The Scout Bobber wasn't new for 2020, of course, but it was my first proper ride on one, and it kind of blew me away. It just feels a lot more raw than the competition, like the Triumph Bobber, for example. There are no riding modes, no traction control, no slip assist clutch, just a big ass V-twin, some super loud pipes courtesy of Crazy Horse, and all in a chassis that handles pretty well for this style of bike. It has got a surprising amount of top end power, so if you want a bit of a lazy cruiser style bike but with a bit more punch than a Harley Sportster or whatever, then look no further. The styling also really does it for me with this bike. I love these simple matte paint jobs that Indian do with the blacked out hardware, and I think it works particularly well on the Scout Bobber. The other bike that we had that day was the MV Agusta Super Veloce 800, which I'd been absolutely dying to ride ever since I first saw the concept bike back at the London Motorcycle Show in 2019. It's basically an F3 800 but with a retro body kit, and I'd already ridden that bike at Crazy Horse previously, but that didn't really take away from the specialness of riding it. Yes, it's pretty much the same in terms of speed and handling, but it just looks so damn good to me that it was twice as fun to ride. It probably helped that Crazy Horse have fitted the Arrow exhausts that don't usually come on this model, but they're standard on the super premium Seri Oro version. You could hear it coming a mile off and it sounded just as good as it looked. So here we have it, number 10, nowhere near as beautiful as the MV in my book, but if I'm honest with myself and look past all that superficiality, it was the best bike I rode last year, the KTM 890 Duke R. I really feel like it embodies their motto of ready to race. It's got basically slick Michelin Power Cup 2 tyres that have just a few token grooves in them, perfectly set up suspension from their in-house WP Apex brand, a punchy parallel twin that pops and crackles when you bang it through the quick shifter, and super sharp Brembo style lemmers to haul it up when you need to. The electronics are top notch, the riding position is pretty comfortable, but more than anything, it just puts the hugest grin on your face every time you ride it. I'll post a more in-depth video review when I get a chance, but basically, it is that good. Like I say, the looks aren't exactly my cup of tea, but with the Husqvarna Norden 901 launched not far away, which is their restyling of the 890 Adventure, perhaps we might see a 901 VITPILEN or VITPILEN sometime soon, and for me, that'd tick a lot of boxes. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this quick rundown. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the best bikes of last year, so let me know down in the comments below. I'll follow up soon with another list of what I'm looking forward to riding this year, so if you're new here and you want to see that video as soon as it goes live, hit subscribe and I'll catch you next time.